Hi, my name is Mr. Burell, and today I will be reading to you from Alan Gratz's Ground Zero, a novel of 9/11. Brandon, the 93rd floor. Hey, said Brandon's rescuer. You're the kid from the escalator this morning. Yes, that's where Brandon had seen him before. The bald black man with the beard who had almost spilled his coffee all over Brandon and his dad. It seemed like forever ago, but it couldn't have been more than an hour. Looks like it turned out to be a bad day anyway, the man said, helping Brandon sit up. Name's Richard. Brandon. Richard pulled Brandon to his feet. What the heck were you doing out there? He asked. You could have died. Brandon shivered. I'm trying to get up to windows in the world, to my dad. He works up there. The swirling smoke around them made Brandon cough. Richard held a damp t-shirt up to his own face with one hand and reached into his pants pocket and pulled out a wet handkerchief for Brandon. Here, I brought this in case I found somebody, he said. Come on, let's get out of here. They held on to each other as they made their way, crouching down the dark, smoky hall of the 89th floor. It didn't feel weird at all to Brandon to be clinging to a stranger right now. It was reassuring to connect with someone else who was sharing in the struggle to survive. It was a kind of feeling Brandon had with his father, he realized, like they were in this fight together. They couldn't see more than a few inches in front of them for the thick black smoke, and Richard felt his way along the wall. It smelled like a gas station up here, and the sharp odor bit at Brandon's nose and throat made him feel a little dizzy. He held the wet handkerchief Richard had given him closer to his face. They came to a steel door that was bent like the door from the stairs had been, still hanging on its hinges but folded down like a crushed can. A sign on the door said Junhee Law Offices. Richard tried the door. When it wouldn't budge, he pounded on the door. Mr. Chin, he called, his voice raspy from the smoke. Mr. Chin, are you in there? Richard rattled the door handle again, but it wasn't going anywhere. Through the gap in the door, Brandon could see steel beams and ceiling tiles and drywall piled up behind it. I don't think anybody can get through all that, Brandon said. Not until the fire department comes to help them out. If he's still alive, Richard said quietly. Brandon felt a chill run through him. So far, he hadn't seen anyone seriously injured by the accident. He knew people had to have been hurt, maybe even killed. There were whole offices missing right behind them, but to think there might be a dead man right behind this door, buried in the rubble. Worked on the same floor as this guy for 7 years, Richard was saying. Every day I'd see him going into his office. I'd say hello, and not once did he ever say a word back to me. Only thing I know about him is that he swings his tie over his shoulder when he stands at the urinal to pee. Now he's probably dead, crushed when the ceiling fell in on him. Brandon stared at the bent door, wondering what it would be like to have the roof fall on him, to be crushed under the weight of an entire floor. Had Mr. Chen died right off? Or was he still alive under there somewhere, trapped and choking to death on the smoke from above? Come on, Richard said. There's nothing we can do for him. We're dying out here. They kept walking, and Brandon saw the door to stairwell C. Richard went right past it, but Brandon stopped. Wait, he said. I have to go upstairs. I have to get to my dad. Listen, kid, I don't think you're getting up to the 107th floor, Richard said. Something bad happened. Somewhere upstairs, a bomb or something. You saw the whole east side of the building is gone. It was an airplane. A passenger jet hit the tower, Brandon said. That's what someone said. Jesus, said Richard, looking stunned. Come on back to the office with me. We called 911 and they told us to sit tight until the firemen get here. I've just been out collecting up other survivors on the floor. No, I have to get to my dad, Brandon protested. He opened the door to the stairs. It was filled with the same kind of debris Brandon had struggled up in stairwell A, and the clear liquid coming down was a gushing waterfall. But at least the stairwell was still there. The way down was blocked, but Brandon thought there was room to scale the wreckage. Whoa, said Richard. You can't make it up through all that stuff. Brandon climbed in the stairwell. I did it before to get up here, he called over his shoulder. Wait, you can't go alone, Richard hesitated, clearly trying to decide what to do. All right, dang it, I'll come with you. It was easier going with two of them. Richard held onto something and pulled Brandon up, and then Brandon did the same for him, working their way through the wreckage like mountain climbers. They didn't talk during the ascent. They were both huffing too much from the effort and from the thick smoke roiling in the air. Up they went past the closed door to the 90th floor and the 91st floor. The rubble was its thickest yet at the landing of the 92nd floor. When they paused to catch their breath, the door to the 92nd floor bent to and behind it. Brandon could see another mountain of debris. It was so hot that sweat poured from Brandon's hairline, and he dragged a dusty sleeve across his face. Ever been to New Orleans? Richard asked him. Brandon shook his head no. Richard mopped his neck with the end of his wet t-shirt. It's like this in the summer, he said, only without the smoke, like you live on Mercury. Brendan hoped it wouldn't get any hotter, but every hope he had was dashed when they got to the 93rd floor. There was no way up the set of stairs. The landing was completely filled with drywall and metal and concrete, all packed down like a landslide. Brandon tried the door to the 93rd floor, but it was too hot to touch. Through the cracks in the wall, he could see a swirling orange flame inside. The heat burned Brandon's face like a sunburn, and black smoke poured through every opening. The whole 93rd floor was on fire. Richard coughed through the wet t-shirt he'd pressed against his mouth. We can't go any higher, kid. I'm sorry. We have to go back down. No, Brandon cried. My dad's up there, and this is the only way up. Brandon slipped and scrambled up the rubble. He pulled a piece of drywall until they snapped. He tried to dig his way up, but there was just more drywall and still behind that, and behind that. There was no way up to his father and windows on the world. Brandon felt empty inside, like the life had been sucked out of his body. No, 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 he cried, kicking and beating at the wall of debris. Richard picked him up from behind, and Brandon thrashing in his arms. We can't go up, kid. I'm sorry, Richard told him. That plane must have hit the floor right above this one. Look, it smushed the whole floor. There's no getting past that in this or any other staircase. But I have to, Brandon said, tears streaming down his face. We're a team, me and my dad. We're a team. And I left him, and now he's trapped up there, and I'm all alone down here. I'm sorry, kid, Richard said. I really am, but we got to get out of here before we breathe in too much of this smoke. Richard carried him down, his feet slipping and scrambling back to the 92nd floor. When they got to a flat part of the landing, Richard finally let him go, and Brandon slid down against the wall and buried his head in his hands. I'm sorry, Brandon said, sniffling. Richard had only been trying to help, and Brandon had thrown a temper tantrum like a 2-year-old. Richard sat down wearily next to Brandon and put a hand on his shoulder. It's all right, kid. I understand. He said, look, there's a dozen floors between here and your dad. The floor where all the smoke was coming from, that had to be where the plane hit. So your dad, everybody in the windows on the world, up on the 107th floor, they're all right. All right, maybe, but trapped, Brandon thought, above a fire that's burning up. The firemen will put the fire out. Then they'll hack their way up through the mess and save them. If they don't take them off the roof by helicopters first, Richard told him. He's going to be all right, kid. Brandon hoped so. But what about him? He and his dad needed each other to survive. How was Brandon supposed to handle all this without him? Richard stood up and tried the door on the 92nd floor. Jammed, he said. No telling if anybody's alive in there and no getting through. Let's check the other door on the way back down through, make sure everybody's okay. Then we'll go back to my office and wait for the firemen. All right? Brandon nodded. Richard started to pick his way down through the rubble toward the 91st floor, and Brandon gave one last look up the stairs. The 93rd floor was the cutoff. No one below it could go higher, and no one above it could go lower. That was the line that separated Team Chavez. From now on, Brandon was a team of one.